Hello everyone, this is Mitchie and welcome back to the Manic Matter podcast. For today's episode, we are going to look at the Wichita Massacre. To start off this episode, we are going to actually talk about the perpetrators of the crime, which are the Carr brothers. Now, these brothers are Reginald Dexter Carr Jr. and Jonathan Daniel Carr from Dodge City, Kansas. The brothers had already had a lengthy criminal record behind them and were 23 and 20 at the time of the crime. Now, the brothers, they were very close and had a very rough upbringing. Now, of course, that does not excuse what they had done. That is just giving you some background information before we go into what had happened. Now, their family had suffered a great deal after the death of their sister when she was a baby. Family members of the brothers had come forward saying that in their youth that the boys had been subjected to various assaults, both verbal and physical, usually by boyfriends of their mother. Reginald was known to be a troublemaker in school and get into many fights, probably as a result of his home life, showing out. And Jonathan is known to have attempted to commit suicide at least once by the time he was 16 years old. All of this led to them having a long record with the police that was not good. Now, as a group, they had set out to Wichita, Kansas in December of 2000 with the intent to rob. This is where they encountered Andrew Schreiber. Andrew was a 23-year-old assistant baseball coach at a local gas station. The brothers had approached him at gunpoint and forced him to go to various ATMs to withdraw as much money as he could because, ATMs have a limit on how much you can take out. After that, they took Andrew to a remote area, shot out his tires, and left him out in the winter elements without any kind of help. Now, it's said that only Reginald committed this crime, or he was convicted of this crime, and it wasn't Jonathan that was convicted, so nobody really knows if it was who was with Reginald at this time. Now, a few days later, a woman was in her car in the neighborhood when she was targeted by both Reginald and Jonathan. This woman was 55-year-old Linda Ann Walenta. She was a woman of small stature. She worked as a librarian. When the brothers approached her car, it was a horrific shock to Linda. They somehow managed to get her to roll down her window by claiming they needed help with their car. When she rolled down her window, they pulled out a gun and pointed it in her face. Naturally, she became very frightened, and Linda attempted to start her car to try to escape, but her car was already on, so it sputtered her engine. Now, she attempted to back up, but as she was attempting to do so, she was shot by the brothers 3 times. She managed to lay on her horn, and it alerted the neighbors, and the brothers fled. But by the time the police arrived, after a neighbor had called 911, they were long gone, and one of the gunshots that had been fired into Linda severed her spine. She was rushed to the hospital and was able to give a vague description of the man who had attacked her, but she would succumb to her injuries in the hospital and pass away. But, however, the brothers were not done with their violent spree. This leads us to the night of December 14th, 2000. A young woman who is only known by her alias as Holly G, along with her dog Nikki, was heading to her boyfriend's house. Holly's boyfriend was a science teacher named Jason Bedford. Now, Jason shared a home with 2 other men, Bradley Hecka and Aaron Sander. When Holly arrived to the house, it was around 8:30 in the evening, and Jason hadn't arrived home yet. Bradley and Aaron had let her in, and she waited for Jason to arrive home. Now, Holly herself was also a teacher and used this time to go over papers and watch a little bit of TV. Now, Aaron had a girlfriend, Heather Muller, who was also a teacher as well. She had arrived and was hanging out with him. It was getting late, so the majority of the house was beginning to go to bed. Heather had fallen asleep in Aaron's bed. Aaron decided that he was going to go sleep on the couch. Holly was in Jason's bed at the time when he had finally arrived home. Holly and Jason were still awake when the light on their front porch had come on. It indicated that somebody had come to the door. It being late, they weren't necessarily expecting anybody, so they had no clue who it was. Then they heard voices outside shouting. So right after they heard the shouting, the door was kicked in, and before either Holly or Jason could really gather themselves together to find out what had happened, there was a man standing in the doorway of their bedroom, ripping the blankets from them. Then there was another man right behind the other man, which we know now was the Carr brothers. Aaron was dragged into the room and thrown on the bed. Both the men, the Carr brothers, had their guns drawn, demanding to know who else was in the house. Holly and Jason, horrified, gave out where everybody else in the house were. So the Carr brothers gathered up everybody in the house and threw them all in the same bedroom. All of the friends were held captive and were being ordered to remove their clothes and give any valuables that they had on them, and eventually the Carr brothers even threatened to shoot Holly's dog if she continued to bark. For over an hour, the group was terrorized. The brothers forced some of the group members into a closet and would take different people out periodically to force them to have sex with each other, while the brothers watched. Aaron had initially refused to do these acts, but eventually they had forced him after they had beat him in the head with the gun. And the horror became so intense that somebody in the closet had urinated on themselves from the sheer terror that they were enduring. Jonathan then took the opportunity to assault both Heather and Holly during this time. Now, when the brothers became bored of assaulting everyone, they forced each victim to pull out their bank cards and would take them to various ATMs, just like they did with Andrew Schreiber, and withdraw all their money from these various ATMs, as much as they could from each one. And in total, they managed to take about $2,000. Now, once back from all the ATMs, Reginald and Jonathan both returned to doing the sexual assaulting on the women. During this assault, Holly said she remembered Reginald telling her to, quote-unquote, relax. I won't kill you. Yet. Once done again with assaulting the group for some time, the brothers decided that they were going to look through the house again for more valuables to take. During this time, they found an empty coffee can with a ring in it, and when they found that, they yelled out to the group to see whose ring it was. And this is where they found out that Jason had stashed away the ring and looked at Holly and said, "That's mine. I was going to propose to you with it." So the brothers, not giving a single fuck, only wanted to know if the ring was worth any kind of money or if it was one of a kind so they could try to get money out of it. Now, Jason had planned to propose to Holly on Christmas Eve, but that would never happen. So now it's the dead of night. The group were forced into 2 cars, stark naked, and driven from the house. They were led into a snowy field and told to kneel. One by one, they were shot execution style. Holly was the last in the group to be shot, and she fell over and was kicked by the brothers. The friends were in a massive lump and then were ran over by the Carr brothers as they drove away from the scene. Now, miraculously, Holly was still alive despite being shot and despite being ran over. She was the only one. Now, what kept her alive was that she had a claw clip in her hair. Somehow, the bullet that they shot at her managed to bounce off of this clip, and she was the sole survivor. Now she had to get herself out of this situation. She had to pull through the shock. She had to pull through everything. All of the grief, all of the horror, all of the terror, and get out of the situation. Of course, she was trying desperately to save her friends, but it was to no avail. They were gone. She stumbled around naked through the elements, bleeding, hurt, obviously, because she was just ran over, so she's obviously got broken bones. She's completely injured. She finally managed to find a house with lights on and made her way to it, hiding when any cars would pass by, because she was horrified that the cars were going to be the brothers coming back for her. The couple that answered the door were naturally horrified themselves to see a naked, bleeding woman, but they took her in and they covered her up to, protect her dignity, and called for help. Now, Holly began to recount what happened to her as she thought she was dying. So, the dispatcher on the phone, she recounted every single thing that she could remember and this hyper-awareness that she had going on. She did manage to survive, though. She was the only one that survived this thing, this poor woman. So, she was taken to the hospital to be treated for all of her wounds. And in total, what she went through, she was frostbitten, had a fractured skull, and multiple injuries that she suffered from her sexual assaults. Out of all of this, not even her dog survived. What is so fucked up about this, not only did they execute all of her friends, but they went back to the house and shot her dog. They looted the house again and just beat her dog to death. Now, the home, when the authorities were called, the home naturally was a crime scene. In the early hours the following day, when they noticed a car continuing to drive through, the police taping it off, an officer thought it was weird that a car would just continue to drive through the area. So he managed to get the license plate number of this vehicle. And then another officer made a point to track the car and pull it over. During this traffic stop, the driver was revealed to be Reginald Carr. He actually was allowed to leave because at this time the police didn't know who had actually committed the crime. They weren't looking for a specific car other than Jason's truck, because all they knew were the cars that were at this house during the time. They didn't know of any other specific things. But the brothers who committed the crime had not driven anything else. Well, not yet at least. So Reginald actually went with Jonathan and then got Jason's truck and used it to go get Reginald's girlfriend's, used it to go to Reginald's girlfriend's home. A neighbor in that area noticed Jason's truck from an all points bulletin that was put out, and that neighbor called it in, so good on that neighbor. Police were able to arrive in time before, Reginald came to his senses and tried to hide the damn truck. So along with the truck, they found clothing and other items that were confirmed to belong to the victims. Police then surrounded the house and arrested Reginald. Later on, they found Jonathan. He was confronted, Jonathan was confronted by a friend when she saw the news of the homicide and then saw the all points bulletin that was put out about the truck and even the clothes that the suspect was reported to be wearing from Holly's account, because this was put out all on the news. Jonathan hadn't even been bothered to change his clothes. After the crime had been committed, Jonathan went home and went to sleep in the same clothes that he had committed the crime in. The friend of Jonathan was so horrified by what he had done that the friend was who called the cops on Jonathan. He ended up trying to take off on foot, but he was captured. So good on that friend for not, sticking up for Jonathan and trying to hide him. So looking into a quadruple homicide with the other crimes that had recently happened, authorities connected the brothers to the mugging of Schreiber, the death of Wichita, and the murder of the friends, and then the assault on Holly G. With Wichita's identification of Reginald before her death, Schreiber's report of his assault, Holly's testimony, the brothers were set for trial with 113 counts of kidnapping, rape, robbery, and capital murder. It was said that Jonathan had questions about capital murder and asked if lethal injection was painful, which is really fucking ironic considering all the shit that he had done. The brothers were convicted on all counts and sentenced to death for the murders and life in prison for the rapes and robberies. With the exception of Jonathan, like I said earlier, somehow he got acquitted for the robbery of Schreiber because for some reason they couldn't tie him to it. They somehow thought that it was another guy that Reginald was with that day. Now, of course, they did try to appeal their death sentence, and in 2014, it was said that the Kansas Supreme Court did overturn their death sentence on appeal. The reason behind this was they believed that the judge at the trial at the time didn't adequately separate the penalty proceedings, and most of the convictions were still upheld though. Naturally, the Attorney General appealed that ruling to the U.S. Supreme Court. In 2015, they heard the case, and in 2016, the death sentences were reinstated for the brothers. As of 2022, the Kansas Supreme Court held the death penalty for the brothers. Now, looking back, when I covered the Shannon Christian and Christopher Newsom case, much like what happened there were a lot of speculations that because the victims of what happened were white and the perpetrators were black, that these crimes were racially motivated, but the district attorney refuted the claims. However, they claimed there wasn't any evidence to suggest that it was racially motivated. It was just a spur-of-the-moment crime that had happened. But a lot of the conservative media didn't agree with that statement, however. They cited a belief that the media downplayed the crimes of black on white versus white on black. There was also a question of another similar accruing massacre that happened right before this one that didn't get a lot of attention on the media either. It raised concern for some in the black community that the victims of the crime were black and that they were pushed on the back burner due to the victims of the Wichita Massacre being white. Both crimes were horrific, and they resulted in deaths of innocent victims, and that the media was just pitting everybody against one another. So, the aftermath of the Carr brothers' crimes, to look at it, it's a very horrific and bittersweet ending for everybody. And I say this because the school that Heather worked at, they established an annual award that would be given to the graduating 8th graders. Linda's employer, the Wichita State University, they established scholarships in her memory. And also on a brighter note, during the Carr brothers' trial, Holly G. and Andrew Schreiber, somehow they were able to manage to find some solace in each other that led to a blooming relationship and then them getting married. So even though there was heartbreak because Jason wanted to marry Holly but never got a chance to, Holly was able to find love again and was able to get married herself. So, even though there was heartbreak and there was pain and there was destruction that these two brothers caused, it still resulted in some sort of, silver lining in the end, as much as it's painful to say. At least two people got to rewrite a happy ending. Now, as for the Carr brothers, they're still trying to request a resentencing on the capital murder case for them. But to date, they are still set for death, and they are in a maximum security prison in El Dorado as a Kansas City judge is still denying their request. So that is the story of the Wichita Massacre. If there's anything that I got wrong or anything you would like to add on to this, please feel free to let me know. You can reach out at manicmatterpodcast@gmail.com. You can also reach out on Facebook or Instagram at Manic Manor Podcast. You can reach out in the comments on YouTube as well. If you feel so inclined, we do have a Patreon as well, patreon.com/Manic Manor Podcast. And that does it for today. So I hope you guys have a wonderful day, and today is Mother's Day in the U.S., so happy Mother's Day for all you wonderful mothers out there. So until the next one, I hope you guys have a wonderful week, and we will see you in the next one.